my name is Robin, and welcome to English Grammar Now. Today, we're talking about the bigger, better lesson because we're studying comparative adjectives. First, let's talk about what these are. Comparatives are a type of adjective that let us compare two things. So instead of just saying, this tree is short and that tree is tall, we can make a sentence like this. That tree is taller than this tree. It's easier to say, and it helps us not repeat ourselves. So, how do we make a comparative adjective? Well, the good news is the rules are pretty simple. We can take any normal adjective and change it using one of two rules. The first rule is, if it's a short adjective, we add ER at the end. Short adjectives are ones that have only one syllable, or they might have two syllables if the ending is Y. So some examples of this are tall, hot, funny, light, smart, old, and easy. You can see that some of these words have only one syllable, like tall or hot. And some words have two syllables, but the ending is a Y, like funny or easy. So for those adjectives, we can add the ending ER, and there are some spelling changes that we'll study in a moment. For the other kinds of adjectives, we add more in front of the adjective. This is easier because there's no spelling changes. We have to know what kind of adjective it is. If it has two syllables and it doesn't end in a Y, or three syllables or more. Some examples of these kind of adjectives are pleasant, modern, beautiful, intelligent, expensive. These are longer adjectives, and so we don't make them even longer by adding an ending. Instead, we put the word more in front of the adjective to change it into a comparative. So let's look in detail at the short kind of adjectives, the ones where we can add ER at the end. For short adjectives, if it ends with an E, we only add the letter R. We don't add another E into it. So be careful when you're spelling them. Late will be written as later. Nice will be written as nicer. If the adjective ends with a consonant, vowel, consonant, always all of those together and in that order, then we have to remember to double the last consonant. So for an adjective like big, if we're adding the ending ER, we have to remember to double the G. Bigger is spelled B-I-G-G-E-R. Also for an adjective like hot, when we add the ending, we double the T. H-O-T-T-E-R. So remember to look for adjectives that end with consonant, vowel, consonant to know if you need to double the last letter. If the adjective ends with a Y, we change the Y to an I and then add ER. Here's some examples of that. Happy becomes happier. Early becomes earlier. Be sure to remember that if there's a Y at the end, we need to change it into an I. Now you try. We have some adjectives in the box on the side. Big, sweet, slow, close, cold, and tall. You can take each of these adjectives and change them into a comparative adjective, and then decide which one will go in each of the sentences. We've already done one for you. In the example, this one is too small. Get me the bigger one. Remember to look for some of those spelling changes in case you need to double the last letter or change Y into I. Go ahead, give it a try. Here's the answers to those questions. For number 1, your brother is way taller than you. For number 2, please drive slower. The speed limit is 40. For number 3, this lake is colder than I thought. I'm freezing. Number 4, my new school is closer than the old one. I can walk there. For number 5, you like your coffee sweeter than I do. Can you see how these sentences are used to compare two different things? For example, in number 1, your brother is being compared with you. In number 2, we're comparing how you are driving with how I want you to drive. I want you to drive slower. These adjectives help us to compare two things and say which one is more or less than the other. Now let's look at those longer adjectives where we add more in front of it instead of an ending. For two-syllable adjectives that do not end in Y, or for three-syllable adjectives or more, we will add the word more in front. Here's some examples of that. The cakes are more expensive than the cookies. Do you think the muffins are more delicious than the cookies? I think the cookies will be more sugary and more enjoyable. You can see in these sentences how we're comparing the two different things. In the first sentence, cakes and cookies. The cakes are more expensive than the cookies are. Now, there are some irregular adjectives that we need to look out for. For some adjectives, we can change them into a comparative using both methods. We can add the ER ending, or we can add more in front of it. This is because many people have used them in both ways so often that both are acceptable. For example, if we want to change quiet into a comparative adjective, we could say quieter, or we could say more quiet. Both of those are okay. We could say cleverer or more clever. We could also say simpler or more simple. Again, these could follow the rules, but because they're used both ways so often, it doesn't matter which one you choose. There are also some adjectives that follow irregular patterns, so we need to memorize these. For example, good changes into better. So an example sentence would be, those shoes are better than my old ones. If we want to talk about someone being healthy or well, the comparative adjective is also better, but the meaning is slightly different. Here's an example sentence. He had a fever yesterday, but today he's better. Bad also is an irregular adjective. It changes into worse if we want to make the comparative. And far has two options. We might write farther, or we might write further. These are used interchangeably, so it doesn't matter which one you take. Have you noticed that when we make a comparison, we often use than after the comparative adjective? That's an important thing to notice. In these kinds of sentences, than is an important word. Here's some examples of us using it. My cousin is younger than I am. Mars is smaller than Earth. Mount Everest is higher than all other mountains. The subway trains are more frequent than the buses. So this helps us to introduce the second thing that we are comparing. The first thing is the subject of the sentence. The second thing is what we're comparing it to. But one thing we should be careful about is to spell than correctly. Many people will make the mistake of spelling it T-H-E-N. This is a different word. If we write then, it's talking about something that comes next in time. Like in the sentence, the train stopped, then I got on. Then is talking about what comes next in time, but than is helping us to compare two things with a comparative adjective. Here's an activity for you to try it out. You can see the pictures on the side with some adjectives that describe each one. The car is expensive. The bicycle is cheap. The lion is big. And the mouse is small. The orange book is funny. The blue book is serious. See if you can make a comparative sentence about these pairs of things. Don't forget that you need to use than after the comparative adjective when you are introducing the second thing. Go ahead, give it a try. Here's how we could write these comparative sentences. Number 1. The car is more expensive than the bicycle. Number 2. The opposite. The bicycle is cheaper than the car. Number 3. The lion is bigger than the mouse. Did you remember to write bigger with 2 G's? Number 4. The mouse is smaller than the lion. Number 5. The blue book is more serious than the orange book. Number 6. The orange book is funnier than the blue book. Did you remember that serious is an adjective with 3 syllables, so we can't add an ER ending. We have to put more before the adjective. Great job! Here's a conversation that uses a few comparative adjectives. See if you can spot them as we're reading through. How are you liking the classes this semester? Well, I'm definitely busier with all the homework. Biology is way harder than last year's science class, but I think it's more interesting. Really? I think it's just more disgusting. I don't want to talk about tiny cells or tinier bacteria. I guess I like that we can try so many things. It's funner to do experiments than write essays. You're right. There's nothing more boring than writing essays all day. Here's some of those comparative adjectives. You can see that we also often use than to introduce the thing we're comparing it to. And you'll notice that some of these adjectives have spelling changes, like busier ends with a Y, so we have to change the Y into I when we make the comparative form. We do the same thing with tiny, changing to tinier. We also have some longer adjectives like interesting and disgusting. We can't add an ending onto those, so we put more in front of them. There's also one adjective that is very much debated. Fun, changing to funner. A lot of people will say more fun, so you might see both of those. Thank you so much for studying comparative adjectives with me today. Now we can compare 2 things and say which one is more than the other. I hope to see you again next time. Goodbye!